thanks for reminding me. Prayer is a great way to start. So if all of us can just kind of drop into our bodies, notice what it feels like to be in the chair, what it feels like to be here, and thank you for your effort to get here. I really appreciate connecting to people. I love sharing my story. And so breathing in and breathing out, feeling our bodies, noticing what it feels like to take a deep breath in and exhale that out. And my prayer today is, may my words be just what you need to hear. And that my prayer is to connect to each of you and to have divinity speak through my voice to say what you need to hear today. Something of encouragement, something of hope, something of validation, something reminding you of the gift that you are, the beauty that you are, the strength and resilience that you've come through in your lifetime, because each of us have had difficult things. They've been losses, trials, your own near-death experience, your own difficulties, and that each of us have come through it as best we can. And that coming together today, we're honoring one another, honoring what our resilience is, our place where we've grown strong at the broken places. The place where we've come to know ourselves even more because we've been pressed down or pressed open, broken open, and we've found out what we're made of through our own trials. Breathing in and breathing out that self-compassion, that self-honoring, that we can take our difficulties and transform them into gifts for ourselves to know who we are, as well as have compassion for others. Because when we go through difficulties, it breaks us open to know what it feels like, what that human suffering feels like. So again, thank you for the honor of allowing me to be here today with you and having your group come together. Looks like a beautiful space, a beautiful day. So I'm dropping into my body, seeing you all. And so I'm going to begin into my story. And so first I want to set it in a greater context. So this, like what it showed on the thing, that I've had multiple near-death experiences. And today I'm going to share the one I had when I was 8 years old. It was 1977. And I am American. I was born in America. And the context of it, as many of you also might know, that when we come from a family where something has gone amiss, that all of us are born, we're hardwired born to want to connect to each other, to our children, to our parents. And sometimes something generational has gone amiss, that somewhere along the line, the natural instinct to want to protect our children, to want to connect to our children has gone amiss. Whether it's been, somebody went to war and that knocked them off center in their ability to express themselves and express their caring, or whether it's generational abuse. But just, again, coming back to trusting, we're all born to connect, and we're all born to want to help each other and protect each other. So something had gone amiss in my family, and my parents had lost that natural instinct to want to protect their children. And so, unfortunately, I had an abusive childhood experience, and I was exposed to other adults who were not mentally well and were pedophiles. And one of those adults that I was exposed to spotted me as an unprotected child and chose to abduct me. And so he came to my school at the end of the day. It was the end of the school year. I was in second grade. And I was already quite equipped at coping with abuse and adapting, to whatever I needed to do to survive. And so many of us know that experience of our nervous system adapting to whatever's needed, whatever gets us through. And so he came to my school at the end of the day. He'd watched that I walked home, and both my parents worked. So usually when I went home, there was nobody at home, and I would go play outside, and that was fine. But on that particular day, end of the school year, he tracked me, and he came into the school literally physically got me, and everybody had already left for the day, and put me in his vehicle, and from there took me to a place where he drugged me, and then, as best as I can remember, he put me in a duffel bag. And everything I'm going to share with you today is the best of my memory. Anything that feels like it's not very solid, I'm going to let you know, because I'm bringing this back from 42 years ago, as well as when we have trauma, our brain does two things. We either hyper record and know every single detail. And raise your hand if you've kind of had that experience where you've had something difficult, something life-threatening, and you've hyper recorded and you know every minute of it. Thank you. Yeah. Or we also dissociate and we blank things out, and then things will feel very far removed and it will be difficult to remember the details. And one of the things that's incredible about I've been writing my story down for 10 years, and my husband, as Tamara spoke of, has been so helpful, and he's really interviewed me for 10 years, a whole decade, to really bring out every detail. Because what we know about trauma and the brain is that when we have a trauma, the information gets stored in different areas. So we have the smell over here, and the sound over here, and the emotion in another part of our brain, and the visual in another part of our brain. So when people are initially telling a trauma story, it's often not very cohesive because it's very scattered in how we landed for us. So what's been incredible for me in this process of writing my book is bringing together the cohesive story, bringing the sound and the smell and the visual and the emotion and the body sensation, bringing that all back together to make a healing story instead of a trauma story. And my commitment to my readers in writing this book is that I'm going to give them my healing, not my trauma. And can you feel that difference? Of that I've made meaning of it for myself. I've gone through the difficulty of it to transform it so that I can deliver the healing and not just the hard facts. So going back to my story, so he had physically gotten me and then drugged me, and like I said, the last I remember was he was military, and so he had a military bag and putting me in that bag and kind of stuffing things around me. And the next thing I know, so I was on the East Coast, and so we're near the Philadelphia airport, the international airport, which is where the next IANDS conference is going to be. And the next thing I recall, that when I come back to being conscious, I'm in a room, I'm draped over a footstool, and I feel really horrible. I feel very bruised, my back is injured, my neck is injured, and I have been drugged, and my brain is very foggy. And when I come alert enough to lift my head and notice, I see the man that abducted me, and he's now in military fatigues. And what I have to do in that moment is not figure out exactly what happened, but figure out how am I going to survive. And he was a person who was so confused, so off-center, that it just felt like hatred fueled his every action, his every choice. And so I had to figure out not only how am I going to physically survive this, but how am I going to survive to not become like him? How am I going to keep my kindness, my caring intact? How am I not going to become hateful in his presence? And so he was very physically and sexually abusive. And at one point I had really had enough. I just decided, I'm not sure I even want to live another day. And so I challenged him, and he, being much bigger than me, he assaulted me. He kicked me in the ribs, and my ribs were being broken. And I had made it out into the hallway. I now understand we were on a military base, and that we were actually in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And to give context, the Rhodesian War, I think the years were 1974 to about 1979. And so 1977, when I was there, was the height of the war. And so the best I can put together, he was going over to be a mercenary for the Rhodesian army. And people have informed me that he probably had about 5 days of training. So I think I was with him for 5 days. And so again, he who was assaulting me, I made it out into the hall. Somebody across the hall opened the door and pulled me in and saved my life. I think they might have been armed, because that probably would have been the only way to stop him. And I thought, okay, this is it. This has been a really hard lifetime. I've suffered lots of abuse. You know, right now my ribs are broken. I'm coughing up blood. And the angel showed up, and I thought, this is it. I'm going to get to go home to Source. I'm going to get to go home to that sparkling light. And what she told me was, it's not your time. And I said, I want a new angel. I want somebody who's actually going to do something. I don't want just comforting words. She was telling me, it's not your time. It's okay. You'll make it through this. And I thought, I don't want to make it through this. I want to go home. I want this to be done. So I didn't get to go home right then. And I did survive. And I woke up again in a hospital. And I have now been able to visit that hospital twice. I found the actual bed where I was. And it was an incredibly lonely experience being a child in that hospital. It was a children's ward, and there was no other children there at the time. And again, it's that digging deep for those of you who, you know, whether you've had difficulty or trauma in your adult life or in your childhood, it's often very lonely and very isolating. And that is the nature of trauma. And again, coming back to, we all long to heal and connect. And so I made it through that hospital experience. He came and got me. No one stopped him from taking me with him again. And he drove me in a vehicle, and we went to a marketplace. And in the marketplace, he spoke to some other military people. And there he did something that was the greatest thing and also horrible for me, is that he got in a Jeep, and without waving goodbye or saying goodbye, he drove away. And so on the one hand, I just lost my worst enemy. You know, I completely wanted to be rid of him, and that was happening. On the other hand, he was the only person who knew where I came from. I just lost my ride home. And he had put me in the care of another man who was a Black African man, who I'm not sure how much English he spoke, and I didn't know what the arrangement was. And so again, the intense loneliness. Here I am in this market. I'm looking around. I am the only white person. I don't speak any of the language. I can't even make any sense of what's happening around me. Everything is completely foreign. And I have no people. I have no home. And I really have no reason for wanting to live anymore. And so just sitting with those moments of healing, and that I've had to come full circle with that. And I think those moments broke open to the very core of my depth, the passion for connecting to others. And that's so much a part of my work that I do in my healing, is about connecting and really saying to people, I see you. I see your life history. I see what you've walked through. So the man who was taking care of me came back and found me and took me on a bus. That bus was a very old bus, and it went through kind of an area that began to become hilly. And the bus broke down, and we were all directed to get off and walk. And this is my first day out of a hospital bed. My painkillers have run out, and I really can't keep up. So the group moves on ahead of me. And the man who was to take care of me, he goes and he pushes on my back, which means he pushed on my broken ribs. And I literally turn around and bite him to get him to stop. And so he kind of thinks, oh, you know, what is this demon child? I don't want to be with her. And he leaves me behind. So now I'm in Rhodesia at the height of the war. And the war is about land and land use, and that colonialism had come in and taken over a lot of the land. So the native people who lived there were trying to push back and recover land use and farming. And so there was 3 factions to this war. One was the white government that had come in and colonialized. And then there was 2 factions, one very extreme guerrilla faction. And so what was happening is that white farmers were being killed in an effort to kind of push back and have that land reclamation. So to be a white child alone in the bush, really my hours were numbered. And the chances of me surviving either from animals or from guerrilla soldiers was extremely low. And so I just sat down, not knowing what else to do, and just watched the sun go across the sky. And what happened next is that soldiers came by, picked me up. And I thought, this is it, I'm gonna die. They're all fully armed. And instead of shooting me, they picked me up and transported me. And I just did another return trip to Zimbabwe, and I now know the location where they transported me, and I got to visit it again. And what I found out through other people's filling in my story is that I was in the hands of the guerrilla soldiers. And they had an argument, literally physically over me, about whether to kill me or whether to help me get to the border. And so since you can see me, you know that the person who was advocating for, she's an unarmed child, she's nothing to do with any of this, that he was the one who won the argument. And he transported me in the night closer to the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa. And so what happened there is that he dropped me off and pointed, to this village, and that he knew that they would be probably sympathetic to a white child. And I didn't go in the village that night because I heard barking dogs, and that very much scared me. And my need for food and water was great, but my need to not be with those barking dogs was greater. And so I spent the night in a tree by myself. And the stars were brilliant, and I was free of my abductor. And I didn't know at the time the danger that I was in terms of wild animals. I had climbed up into a tree, and I felt free. I felt like I've made it out. And in the morning, I heard singing, and that the women were singing. And it sounded something like this. And I wanted to find out that source of their joy and their celebration. So I went forward, and these women spotted me. And, they were very startled. What was a white child alone doing near their village? And eventually I came closer, and they set out food and water, and I ate it. And it was like sweet, kind of mealy potato. I didn't quite know what it was. Now I know it's boiled cornmeal, in that they set out in a gourd, and I drank the water that was in a gourd. And then they received me in, and they set out animal skin for me to sleep on that night. And it was the next day that the children welcomed me in. And the children came over, and they were touching my hair that was more blonde then, and they were touching my white skin, and they had never seen and been this close to a white child before. And then they took me to the fire circle where ceremony was done. And they took the black ash, the burnt sticks, and they were putting it on my face and fixing me and making me look more like them. And the eldest girl was telling a story, and it was in Venda, so I could not understand it. But she would make these big declarations, and she would draw more on my white skin. And what I sensed she was speaking was, and this is how she arrived to our world. She came from somewhere out there, and now she's here with us. And by the end of her storytelling, all the children were putting black ash on me, covering me over. And for the first time in my life, I felt welcomed. I felt part of. I felt wanted. And what happened next deepened that experience even more. One of the women came over and she had been watching all this and she was laughing. And if you've ever been to Africa or had the privilege of knowing somebody who's come, the laughter is so heartfelt, so full body, so whole face. And she was laughing and I was thinking, okay, if an adult thinks this is good, it must be good. And she started calling to me, calling me over to her. And she was singing, and this beautiful liquid song that she was calling me with, I wanted to be closer to the source of that liquid love. And so I went over closer to her, and of course I was very defended child. I was very self-protective. But she was calling me in, and I could feel the love and the welcoming. And our nervous systems are designed to look for welcoming or warning. And she was pouring out an open door of welcoming. So I finally went close enough that she could touch me, put her hand on my shoulder. And she's continuing to sing to me, and it's melting my defendedness, melting my hardness. And she's taking me in, and she's wanting me to look in her eyes. And I never looked in adults' eyes because I was afraid I would become like them. I was afraid I would get their meanness or their cruelty inside me if I looked in their eyes. And I was also so ashamed growing up in the way I did that I was so bad. And if somebody looked in my eyes, they might see how bad I was. But she was calling me to look in her eyes. And it was her song and her presence that convinced me it was safe to actually look her in the eye. And when I did, I saw the eyes of a mother. I saw the eyes of caring. I saw the eyes of somebody who was going to protect me. And I literally collapsed forward in her arms. And so I got to become part of this community, part of this village, this cluster of families who live together. And I was taught songs. I was welcomed in to do part of ceremony. I was taught how to plant food. And I thought, this is my new life. This is my new family. This is where I belong. And being there at a certain point, I actually forgot that I was white because I was part of what was happening. And I didn't understand the severity of the war that was going on around us. And one day I had wandered to a creek, which I've actually found that creek. And normally that time of year it would be a drought year, but 1976 and 1977 were flood years, so there was still water in that creek and water in the Limpopo River. And I was playing by myself when we had come to this creek and swam in this little creek many times, so it felt safe to me. But today I was by myself and I was playing and was very focused on my play and with dirt and sticks, and then I heard a noise and I froze and I looked up and there was a soldier right across this little creek from me. And he saw me and spotted me, and I froze like a rabbit. And I prayed, please love me like the people who have found me. Please see who I am as a child. But through his injury and through his insult to his being, he saw me as the enemy. And so he pulled up his rifle, aimed at me. And when his gun barrel became just a circle, I gave up all hope. And my body was frozen in place. But just as I began to turn my lower body, he pulled the trigger and the gun and the bullet grazed the top of my head. It blew me off my feet and I slammed down to the ground. And again, I prayed that please let somebody from my village come help me. I'm totally lost. But instead what happened is this waving action, this back and forth, that my life force was moving out of my body and coming back in. And then very quickly my view went to above and I was watching my body. And it was like watching a city go into a blackout. First, my legs had no vitality, no life force. My chest had lost all its life force. My arms and my head. And I was watching this from above and I thought, if that life force doesn't go back into my form, I'm going to die. And what happened next is that my awareness was pulled back down through my body, back out through an opening in the back of my heart. And I was being transported very quickly and very focused. I knew what now was in charge, knew where I was to go, and I was going there quickly. It was like being on a pinpoint rail of complete focus. And when I arrived to my destination, instead of feeling very precise, it felt like I landed and I was like all spilled out, that I was kind of all the parts of me were spread all over the place. And I felt very disoriented. And what happened next is that something feminine touched my face. And then I remembered I had a face. And it drew me back together. And then I could begin to see again. And I had sight again. And what I saw was a very young, beautiful, elegant Black woman. And her skin was so dark and she had a yellow dress on. And I knew her. I had met her before, but I couldn't quite name her. And then I saw her sister behind her. And I knew that they were welcoming me home. And they waved their hand to the side, and I saw a very beautiful, big, glowing sphere. And I knew I could go into that sphere and I would be completely healed. That there was enough energy in that sphere to heal myself and everyone. And it wouldn't be diminished in the least. But I thought to myself, if I go into that sphere, I lose my new African family. And they've named me Aisha, and they've welcomed me in, and I finally have a mother, and I'm experiencing mother, and I don't want to lose that. And so my grasping to hold on to my newfound family separated me from my sisters and from the glowing sphere. And it backed me up from them, and I began to fall backwards. And as I fell backwards, it was very gentle. And I ended up landing in some place that felt very different. Where I had been was full of warmth and glow and light. And now where I was this stone gray, like Ireland on a cold gray day. And there was a stone stairs up next to me, and it was very worn. And it looked to me and I thought, thousands of people have walked down those stairs. I wonder what this place is. It must be very important if so many people have walked down those stairs. And I was in the stone landing, and I was looking around, and I felt very feeble. I felt very weak, like a newborn animal. My limbs didn't feel in my control. And I was trying to get up, but I could kind of barely move. And then out of nowhere, this older man appeared. And he also seemed very fragile, but he was offering to me his hand to help me up. And I thought, well, if I pull on him, I'm just going to pull him over and we'll both be down. And I tried to get up, but the walls were kind of slippery and wet. So I went ahead and took his hand. And he was actually very sturdy. He was very steady. And so I let him help me up. And he gestured that we were going to go down these stairs, go down further into this area. And I thought, I had it better before. I don't want to go further down into these stairs. But I didn't know what else to do, so I followed his guidance. And I kept walking further, and something was dripping on my shoulder, and I thought, oh, it must be raining. And I checked my shoulder, and it was my own blood. And I realized my head was bleeding. And I was very panicked, and I showed him, and he nodded, he knew. And that encouraged him that we really needed to get down the steps. So then we entered into something that was a very big, dark cave. And I thought, I do not want to go in there. But he was gesturing, and there was something about him that was familiar and that I didn't want to trust, but I did trust. And so I went into the cave with him, and I had to hold on to his arm, and it was totally dark. And I thought, this is a really bad idea. But what happened is the further I went into the cave, there was the expression of all my sadness, all my fear that I was getting to revisit. So my own voice was echoing in that cave, and the face of the abusers from my childhood were coming to me in a very kind of frightening ghost way. And so I pulled to leave, but he held me steady. And what happened is, in his presence, with his steadiness, I came to understand, seeing myself through his eyes, that the abuse was not my fault. That being a vulnerable child was not my fault. And when I came to understand this, and just a flash of self-compassion came through me, and understanding that I'm not bad, that something wasn't wrong inside me that made the abuse happen, then all the ghosts stopped, all my screaming stopped, and there was a presence of peace and stillness. And I saw through his eyes that I was already fine, I was already good enough, and I was okay. So we continued through the cave and came out the other side. And on the other side, it was night sky, and the stars were like living relatives, and everything felt alive. And I looked at him and understood that he could go anywhere, and he had chosen to come help me through my dark cave, through my confusion. And that he was, in my Buddhist language, he was a bodhisattva, one who comes back to care for others, one who comes to help others through their confusion and suffering. And that he found me important enough to join me and help me through and guide me. And so my faith and my trust in him was absolute. And I put my hands in his, and I asked him without words, but just direct from my heart to his, where are we going next? What's next? And he looked at this cliff we were standing on, and he pointed kind of with his nose and let me know, we're jumping off this cliff. And because my faith in him was complete, I said, okay. And so we moved and we leapt off this cliff, and it was like flying in night sky. And the further down we went, we were in morning sunrise. And there again was that glowing sphere. And this time it was 3 times bigger. And he nodded and he said, this is dying. And I thought, if this is dying, then dying is peaceful, calm, and a very deep welcoming home. And again, he kind of inside his heart, he said to me, kind of go there, like go towards the big sphere. And then he gave me the choice, and he parted paths with mine. But I felt that his steadiness was within me. And again, I could have gone to the glowing sphere, and I thought, oh, I want to tell my African family about everything that's happened, about the man in the cave, about finding out that I'm okay and I'm not a bad child, that the abuse wasn't my fault. And so again, that attachment to wanting to be with my African family, I saw a green field down below me, and I kind of aimed my flight to land in that field. And when I did, I was searching around, started running around looking for my African family. And I suddenly had the fear that they had been injured, that they were down on the ground and couldn't respond and couldn't call back to me. And I ran and ran, calling out their names, and that I needed to help them, that they were injured. And I ran until I was exhausted, and I fell on the ground, and I cried out a storm of grief that they were injured and I couldn't find them. I couldn't get to them. I couldn't help them. And when I had cried out this storm of grief, I heard a noise. And I went and I followed that. And there was a man, and he was the presence of peace. And I ran up to him with my desire to get back to my village, to my people. And as I approached him, I could no longer remember why I would ever feel disturbed. He was like a calm lake on a mountain. And I stood before him, and I tried to look close at his face, and he had a beard and a robe and long sleeves, like it was maybe a thick felted fabric. And the kindness in his eyes was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And then his face changed, and it changed to a lion. And then it changed to a child. And then I thought, oh, I would love to show Atto this face. Atto was one of the men in the village who took care of me. And so his face changed to Atto, a black man with this big, beautiful smile. And I became delighted that this being was a man of many faces, that he encompassed all of us. And I realized that we are connected. And what happened next is that he showed me his vision, how he sees the world. And he touched his forehead. He bowed down and touched his forehead to mine. And I could see as he sees. And that I saw this living lines of connection, and that all living things are connected. Every tree, every frog, every mountain, every person is interconnected. And that we can strengthen those living lines of connection with our attention and our love. And that we move, and sometimes some connections dissolve and some others strengthen. And that it's our focus and our love that brings us in relation to others. And so I drew back from my connection to his sight. And my faith in him was absolute. And so what I did next was I leaned forward and merged my entire being into his. We traveled together through a tunnel, and we came out above the place where I had been shot. And so from above with him, I was viewing my body, and my African mother had found me by that time, and she had pulled my body, my limp body, up onto her lap. And she was rocking back and forth, and she was wailing, this huge wailing into the sky. And I wanted to comfort her. I wanted her to know, I'm okay. I'm taken care of. I'm not alone, and I'm not in pain. And she was rocking my body back and forth, and I felt so sad that my face couldn't smile in response to her love. But I became more interested in what was above me than watching this scene. And so I started to rise up. And with that, I was leaving behind my attachment to my life here, my life as Aisha, trusting that everything would be fine. It was like taking off a suit and leaving it behind with no regrets. And I lifted off, and I was going into pure peace. And I was becoming lighter, and any final wounds or beliefs that I was not worthy or good enough were shedding off me. And I was going home to source, to that original, I call it the great heart, welcoming me home. And I consider that the great heart sung me into being as a sound, and that we originate as a sound sung by this great being. And I was going home, purifying more and more, feeling my connection to all things. And that if I desired being closer to the great heart, that's what was happening. And I met more beings that helped purify me along the way. But then something happened. I heard the singing of my African mother. And there were veils that had closed behind me, like a leaf closing opening of the secret garden. And they had been closing behind me, but her song was so powerful. She had called on the ancestors in the land, just like they had taught me in ceremony, that you call on the ancestors in the land when you need help, when you need support, that you remember where you've come from, you remember your lineage through the land. And she called on these ancestors, and her song was so powerful, it reached me on the other side. And when her song touched me, I remembered that I hadn't done my purpose. And my purpose was to be a medicine singer like her, was to help heal like she had done for me. And this song was wrapping around me, reminding me that I'm part of the choir of medicine singers, those who sing the ceremony songs, those who sing at births, those who sing at deaths, to help people remember that each of us are born with a song inside of us. Each of us have our own medicine song within us. And so this remembering is what turned me around. I could have gone further into the great heart, been free of peace, but this remembering of my purpose to sing and allowing her just to fill me up. And so I'm turning around to come home. I'm coming back to her singing. I'm coming back to live this purpose and be part of the choir of medicine singers. And as I'm coming back, I'm starting to feel the weight of my form again. I'm starting to feel human suffering. I'm starting to feel physical pain. And I think, oh, have I made the wrong choice? Should I have kept going? But I've already come this far, and there's a kind of a river guiding me back. And she's still calling me. And so my decision's already been made. And I'm at the final gateway, the final frontier of between the deceased and the living. And I look over and I see a great, great grandmother. And her skin is dark. And I realize she is the first mother. She is the grandmother of all of us. Probably the one who came from originally in Africa. And I look at her, and she comes so close to me, and she welcomes me in. And she sings inside me, and she's singing a song saying, it won't be easy when you go back. You are going to have to still fight for your life. And you are going to have to do things against your own values in order to survive. And remember, you always belong. And even if somebody harms you and can't see who you are, that it's just because they are blind to seeing the truth. And that they have been so injured and not been able to see the true nature of who you are. And that you always belong no matter what. Even if you are completely ostracized, completely left out, you always belong here. And she sang this truth inside me, and I believed her. It was like my heart was a cathedral, and she was singing this song of celebration inside me. And after that, I returned. I went through this final gateway, and I came back, and I landed in the arms of my African mother. And I felt so fragile, like dry, crackly leaves. And it was her container, her arms, her rootedness that helped me feel like I'm going to make it. And others from the village had shown up, and they were panicked and alarmed. But their love and their container was going to keep me safe and keep me alive. And they took me back to the village, and they put dried plants on my wound, and they did prayer. to take the hatred that had come with the bullet off my head. They didn't want me to continue living with that hatred on my head. So they continued this prayer, so that I would be free of the soldier's confusion and free of his hatred. And I began to recover. It was very slow. I had lost a lot of blood. And I was very weak. And I think it was about 2 days later that the soldiers came back. And I was inside a hut. And one of the other mothers was with me. I call her Mama Inambira. We're still looking for the correct names. And I heard shooting begin. And I closed my heart and I closed my ears because I was hearing screaming of those I loved. And what was happening is our village was being attacked. And I made myself go dormant, made myself pull in so I could survive. And when there was no more shooting, Mama Inambira came over and grabbed me and pulled me out of this hiding spot and moved the door to the hut aside. And we stepped out, and what we saw was so wrong. That those we saw were down and not moving. And that my new family had been attacked. And I saw Atto was down. He was the presence of masculine love. He was the presence of love and power and strength in a man, and he was down. And I wanted to jump down from her arms and go over and put my hands on him and save him, as Mami Eten had done for me, to sing to him, to call him back to life. And Mama Inambira wasn't letting me down. She had an iron grip on me, and we were running. And she didn't make it very far before there was another bullet shot that I heard, and we both went down. And I was on this side of her, and the bullet came from that side, and we both went down, and I hit the ground hard, and it hurt my ribs, and it sent incredible pain through my neck and through my head. And when I became kind of oriented again, I looked over, and she was face down, and she was yelling at me to run. And I wanted to be stronger. I wanted to be huge so I could pick her up and carry her. But I was an 8-year-old child who had just been shot 2 days before myself. And she was yelling at me to run, and she had never yelled at me before. And so instead of trying to pull her like I wanted to do, I ran. And I ran, and then there was a slight hill, and I was running towards the Limpopo River. And I wasn't looking back. And when I hit that slight hill, I fell. And I fell forward, and I hit the ground. And what felt like solid ground now no longer felt solid. And I started to wave, and it felt like fluid, and I felt like I was drowning. And what was happening is that I was bleeding again, and I had blood loss again. And so I crossed over again. And this experience was wholly different. I was immediately in a place that was all white, and there was nothing on the horizon. And I was being sung a song, and the song was very simple. It was a children's rhyme. You will live, you will live. And so it was the sound of 3 blind mice. And so I trusted whoever was singing this song to me, because the nicest thing my brother had ever done for me when I was very sick is that he had read the whole trilogy of 3 blind mice. He crawled in bed with me when I was so sick, and he would read part of the 3 blind mice, and I would pull out the next book and he would read it to me. And it was the most loving thing he had ever done for me. Because as some of you might also know, when children are being abused, we tend to separate and not connect and sort of become every man for themselves. So to have him just give me his attention for that long was incredibly valuable to me. So this somebody is singing to me, you will live. And I'm drawn closer to this source. And I'm wondering who's singing to me. And I see a veil, and I can see somewhat of a being on the other side. And then suddenly this being shows me a record. And that's where the song, You Will Live, is being sung to me. And I can see this record very close. And it has a deep gouge in it in the beginning. And I think, oh, this record should be thrown away. It's damaged. And I hear a great voice. The wounds are how I find you so I can love you. This great booming voice. The wounds are how I find you so I can love you at the broken places. And I think, you still want me even though I'm injured, even though I feel damaged from all this trauma? The wounds are how I find you so I can pour my love into the broken places. And then I can see through the veil and this being, this blue-skinned being. I didn't think it was odd that his skin was more of a kind of a deep purplish color. And he had black hair and a bun on his head, and there was beautiful adornment all around him. And he was intense, so powerful. I knew with one hand he could create a mountain, and with the other hand, if he so chose, he could take it down. And he began showing me a kind of a movie inside my mind's eye. And he was showing me two planes of land that were crashing together. And it was destroying what was already there, but it was rising up into a mountain. And so at the end of all that chaos and destruction, there was a beautiful mountain peak. And then he started to show me erosions, sand bit by bit coming down, stone by stone, or avalanches, and that the mountain was coming down. And he was showing me that sometimes when things change, it looks like total destruction, but it becomes the creation of something new. And he showed me the beaches and let me walk on the warm beaches, my feet on the warm sand. And he said, shall we destroy the mountains so you can have the beaches? And I said, I don't like the destruction part. Can we just have both? And he said, destruction makes available the ingredients for a new creation. So what looks like total annihilation now, the loss of the people of your village, is going to become something new. And I said, I understand. And he said, you understand now, but as a human, you'll forget. Because as a human, you can only see one little piece in time. And as a human, you can't see the big picture. But I, as a God, can see the big picture and the cycles of destruction that end up becoming new creation. And he showed me a young woman running in the woods, and that she was free and strong. And I realized that young woman was me in the future. And that while I felt totally annihilated now, I was going to be able to move again. And so I was returned back to my body, and it was incredibly painful. My neck felt very injured. My head felt very weak. And he could speak to me still even on this realm. And he said, pull forward now. This great booming voice, pull forward now. And he showed me, you have to get far from the village before nightfall, because the animals are going to come. When they smell blood, they're going to come. You have to be further from the village. And he showed me that I was going to the well. And so I pulled forward, and I could hardly move. I had no strength. And he lent me his strength. And I really didn't want to live. I had just now lost everything. And I wanted to die. And he lent me his strength. He put his strength inside me. It was not my will that pulled me forward. It was his will. And that I was a drop in the ocean of his strength. And through his strength and his commanding me forward, I pulled forward for hours until I was closer to the well. And I slept. I put sand over myself. It was cold at night. I buried myself in and put sand over myself. And in the morning, again, he commanded me forward to the well. And a woman came, and she found me. And she washed the blood off my, dried blood off my face. She picked me up and put me on her back, and she took me back to her village. And her name is Nia Lucy. And when others saw that she had a wounded white child, they said, "Don't bother with her, it's too dangerous." And they were actually right. If she was found with a white child, she could have been either accused of abducting me, which would have been a very serious crime from the white army, or if she had been found with me from the guerrilla soldiers, she would have been accused of harboring the helping the enemy, and that she could have been killed for that. So when they said that to her of, "Don't bother with her, you know, she's almost dead, just leave her be." And she said, "She's a living human being. I won't throw her away." And it is because of her courage to love bravely that I'm still alive. And she took care of me, and they hid me. There's all kinds of stories. I don't remember it myself, but they put shoe polish on me to cover me up and hide me, and they dressed me as one of them. And her granddaughter is Mayamu, and she helped take care of me, and they put more healing on my wounds, and they had the medicine singer from the area come and sing prayer for me. And they took care of me, and then they tried to find how can they return me to white people. And so the nearest white people were across the Limpopo River into South Africa, white farmers, the Roos family. And so they found somebody who could speak Afrikaans, the white language. And they spoke to them, and they said, "We found this white child and we don't know what to do with her." And the white farmers, the grandmother said, "Oh, we'll give her to us, we'll find her family." So Mayamu's grandmother, Nia Lucy, and Mayamu took me across the Limpopo, and I didn't have a good feeling about this. But they were doing the best that they knew to take care of me and giving me over to white people. But again, I was losing the people that had taken care of me. And so I held on for dear life, and one of the men literally had to kind of pull me off. And what happened is they fed me. I was now in a house. I had running water again. But it was a very different culture. They didn't touch me. They didn't sing to me. And I felt very much like a burden. I felt in the way. I felt like they have their farm work to do. And I didn't feel the same love, because when I was on the other side of the river, I was, children were sleeping right next to me. I was being touched and sung to. And now in this culture, I was dying of loneliness. I had no people, and I was dying of loneliness. And so while I was, being fed even better and, delicious Afrikaans desserts and sweets, I didn't want to live. And so I crawled behind the refrigerator. Now I understand that it was warm behind the refrigerator, so that I could feel held. And I began just to die of loneliness. And probably also I was having an infection. And so the people of that family found me behind the refrigerator and found that I was very ill. And they took me to a hospital in Petersburg in South Africa. And I was given antibiotics, and they began to kind of interview me to find out where my family was. And I didn't want to tell them, because I just wanted to go back over the river and be with my African family. But they kind of threatened me with little girl, do you know what a South African orphanage is like? And told me all about that. So I told them my family name, and by some means they found them. And when I was well enough, I was flown home with an agent. We were trying to figure out what agency that would be, with a man who guided me back. And what was interesting for me was, he was guarding me and he was protecting me, and he was actually a very good man. And when I at one point went into the bathroom on the airplane, I had to figure out the door, getting it open. When I came out, he was right there and he was guarding me. And I thought, now that I'm in this luxurious plane, nobody has any guns, everyone's sleeping, now I have someone guarding me? I could have used you a while ago. So I was returned back to my family, and my father greeted me at the airport. And unfortunately, when I woke up the next morning and I felt entirely disoriented, I really wanted to be back with my African family. And when I tried to tell my mother, like, I have to get back, you know, my African mother is there, I have to get back to her, that what she did, kind of based on her generational abuse, her not wanting to hear the truth, is that she hit me in the face. And she told me, don't ever talk about that again. Like, don't ever speak another word of it. And so I crawled under the bed to get away from her danger and her mental illness. And I put it all away. I put away all my experience. I put them under cover. I buried them down inside me. I've repressed my whole near-death experience. And I buried it all away and just remembered the kind of the facade, the shell of the child I needed to be in my family. And so I repressed everything until I left home at 19. I went to college. That was my way out. And by about like 19 and a half or 20, all my trauma memories started coming forth. And I went inpatient to a trauma treatment center. And that was the beginning of my healing. I never went back home. And it was literally a decade of trauma recovery and healing. And what I appreciate about all the people who helped me do all that recovery, the therapists, the body work, is that I regained my ability to connect to others. And, you know, and some of you may know just the difficulty of having to relive the trauma and go through the emotions. But what happens when we do that commitment, that devotion to the hard work of healing, is that we get ourselves back. So instead of having all the trauma as well as the good repressed inside my body, inside my nervous system, I got to recover all of that. So I regained the relationship to my African mother. I regained the singing, I regained the ceremony, and I regained my ability to feel joy, to connect to others. And the more I did my healing, the more my intuition opened up.